What did you feel?
The anxiety makes you can't eat the day of a game. You can't sleep.
There's been times where I was sitting in the penalty box, I couldn't read a scoreboard.
And then there was the nights where I thought about taking my own life that I was so depressed. This could be the end.
Violence has been a part of sport for as long as we can remember. Players have been cheered on for big hits that they make and big fights that they get in. But what is the cost of all of this? Players are exploited by the leagues that they are in as props to increase revenue and help sales. Their physical health is not thought of at all, leaving them with risks for the present and future. Recent medical findings and incidents that have been brought to the public's eye shed light on the exploitation of athletes in sport today, displaying some of the methods and ways that they use to cope with being the enforcers or muscle of the team, hurting themselves in many games. Many athletes turn to alcohol, prescription drug abuse, and in worst cases, suicide. This leaves us with a critical question. How much are athletes being exploited by their leagues, trainers, and coaches? In 2003, a 17-year-old boy named Eric Kester was a ball boy for the Chicago Bears. Just recently in October, he has come forward to talk about some of the atrocities that he witnessed during his time with the team. While there, he was instructed to carry smelling salts with him in order to help players who had just experienced a hard hit. If they appeared dazed or hurt, he would give them the smelling salt in order to snap them back to attention. The player would go on and continue to play the game. Cameras were not instructed to show the smelling salts on TV. Kester believes that much of the off-field troubles caused by NFL players, particularly alcohol abuse and violence, are just ways that the players endure the gridiron of the game. Another very notable piece by Kester is when he mentioned having to unwrap a wad of gum for a player because this player lacked fine motor skills enough to handle the tiny foil by himself. One athlete group in particular that is exploited when it comes to physical health is the athlete group of the enforcers. They are seen often in hockey and are dressed simply to go out on the ice and fight. Players such as Stu the Grim Reaper Grimson, Dale the Nuisance Hunter, George LaRocque, Willie Plett, and Dave the Hammer Schultz are often thought of when enforcers come to mind. As the fans, a good fight in a hockey game is often enjoyed. However, many of the athletes are beginning to come out against the traumas that they experience while playing as enforcers. One example of this is former enforcer Brant Myers. His career was ended by George LaRocque after a fight that went wrong and broke his eye socket. In a discussion, he said that his stomach was churning so bad before the Oilers game because he knew he had to fight LaRocque. He was quoted saying, "I was in bed, sick, in the afternoon. I didn't even get a pregame meal. I knew I was over the edge." Many of these enforcers have no desire to fight at all, however must in order to keep their roster spot on the team. They know that they cannot rely on their talent, and therefore must assure that they win every fight possible in order to stay on the team, and avoid humiliation from other teammates. With this high level of stress at hand, deteriorating effects occur on the body and the physical and psychological health of the player. Chronic stress and anxiety issues also come into play with enforcers, which can lead to bouts of clinical depression. The high job stress, chronic stress, depression, and other items can be augmented or complicated by bouts of physical pain, which leads athletes to turn to substance abuse and overdoses of pain medication. Many will not let anyone know in fear of seeming weak and will turn to self-medicating, which can further worsen the problem and ultimately end up in the player's death on a rare occasion. In the summer of 2011, Rick Reiplin, Derek Bugard, and Wade Belak, all three past NHL enforcers, unfortunately passed, two of which ended in suicide. The fact that two of these were suicide and within such close proximity of each other leads everyone to wonder if the link between enforcer and suicide or death has any correlation. A linkage between CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, has been found in many different players of many sports, including enforcers in the NHL. This disorder can lead to problems such as substance abuse and depression, and is beginning to be found in more and more athletes. Former enforcer George LaRocque is one of the many players that speaks out against mental health in the NHL and other sports, as shown in this next audio clip.
How many players in the NHL would you estimate are struggling quietly right now without telling people?
There's a lot.
Is it just a coincidence that we have 3 enforcers who die all in one summer? What are we supposed to take away from that?
The fact that 2 of them has committed suicide, that I wasn't as surprised that they were enforcers because I know how tough the job is, and I know what it does to you, how the depression deals with your body and stuff.
You're saying their role as an enforcer possibly drove them to death.
Possibly, yeah.
We will see more deaths if we don't do something.
Definitely, yeah. This is not the end of it.
CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a progressive degenerative disease found in the brain of athletes and other individuals with history of repetitive brain trauma. Concussions can be the cause of this disorder. It triggers a progressive degeneration of the brain tissue, including the buildup of abnormal protein called tau. The changes can happen months, years, or even decades after the trauma and end of athletic involvement. Many signs associated with the disorder include memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, paranoia, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, and eventually progressive dementia. Unfortunately, CTE can only be diagnosed post-mortem. However, efforts are working on trying to discover a diagnosis while the person is still living. This disorder was originally thought to just be found in boxers. However, recently, a Pittsburgh medical examiner found 2 former Pittsburgh Steelers who died in his jurisdiction in 2002 and 2005. These findings opened up the door for further research on this disorder, where it was determined that athletes in contact sports such as boxing, football, ice hockey, wrestling, and military veterans all were susceptible to this disorder. Dr. Charles Tatter is the leader of the Canadian Sports Concussion Project. This is a group of scientists who have come together to study the brains of deceased athletes. This next audio clip played is a discussion with Dr. Charles Tatter based off the discoveries that have been recently found on CTE.
Well, we have actually received the brains of 6 Canadian Football League retired players, and we've completed our analysis of the first 4. And we found that 2 of the 4, in fact, had this condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a big mouthful. We've referred to it as CTE.
What is it? What does it mean if you have CTE?
The brain actually degenerates after repeated concussions. All 4 of these players had repeated concussions, but only 2 of them had this condition.
You touched on the issue of suicide there. We had 3 NHL players lose their lives this past summer. Is it plausible that these 3 players could have suffered from CTE because of repeated blows to the head?
We are thinking that the blows to the brain are, in fact, a cause of depression, and the depression can lead to suicide.
Well, you get some big hits, you gotta dust yourself off, get right back up, because, you never know when it's your time to shine. So even if you get hit, you can't show any emotion or any pain or any weakness to the coach or the other players, because once you show that, they'll pick on you. So basically, no matter how hard you get hit, you got to get back right up and just keep going, no matter how hard the hit was, no matter if you got your wind knocked out or knocked out, you got to get right back up and play the game, because, winning is everything.
Players in various sports are risking their lives and health just to help out their teammates. There is not enough mental health outlets given to them, and they are suffering for this. Players are getting injured on a game-to-game basis, however not willing to speak up in fear of being called a baby, weak, or losing their spot on their roster. The intense pressure is getting to the athletes physically and psychologically, not just in the present, but in future as well. Players find themselves fighting and damaging their bodies extremely, just in order to stay on the team. No thought is being put into the physical health of the athletes for the future. They are just being thought of as props in order to help the team get to their closest Super Bowl, Stanley Cup, or other trophy. It is time that we stop focusing on the best knockout, the best hit, or who could hit the hardest, and start to focus on the mental health of the players and what will benefit them in the future.